And I still have a little bit of hope, otherwise I wouldn't carry on with my activism. But the reality is that the Israelis want to kill all Palestinians, and they have the facility to do so.
Every now and then you meet someone who doesn't let time behave the way we expect it to. You ask a question about the past and suddenly you're in the present. You try to stay with the present and before you notice, you're back in the 1940s again. That's what it's like talking to Dr. Agnes Kory. And let me say this right at the beginning. This isn't an interview for people who can't sit still for more than 10 seconds. Agnes doesn't rush. She doesn't simplify. She doesn't give you the clean little takeaways. She thinks in real time and you feel the weight of that thinking when you talk with her. So if you prefer interviews you can have listened to, this may not be your episode. What struck me was how naturally she moves between her own childhood in the Holocaust and what's happening right now in Gaza. Not as a provocation, not as a slogan, just as a human being who's lived long enough to recognize patterns others refuse to see. She talks about parallels the way someone talks about a memory that won't leave them alone. And the part that intrigued me most, she didn't always think this way. She changed her mind about Israel late in life. That's rare. We all know how hard it is to revise our views once they're woven into our identity. But she did it. And she paid the price for it. Friends gone, students gone, professional circles closing their doors. She talks about that too. But not with bitterness, with this quiet courage that caught me completely off guard. And then, towards the end of our conversation, everything shifts again. Suddenly, we're not talking about politics or history. We're talking about the personal battles she's still fighting. After surviving cancer, after needing a pacemaker, after a multi fractured spine, after everything life already threw at her. And she talks about it with the same clarity she brings to the bigger questions, as if to say, surviving isn't a chapter you close, it always continues. So that's what you're walking into. A conversation that refuses to stay in one lane. A life story that keeps unfolding in the middle of world events. And a woman who still has more fight in her than most of us can imagine. If you want the deeper stories behind conversations like this one, unfiltered, unsimplified, join me on Substack. That's where the layers I cannot cover here are exposed. But now, let's begin. Agnes Kory, what a pleasure having you. And before you say even one word, let me just say you were kind enough. How old are you?
I will be 81 in 2 weeks' time.
Okay. And if I'm indiscreet, you have to tell me, I cut it out. Yeah. So we are here in the third floor of the Palestine House in central London. You had to get up very steep stairs, partly without support on the side. You just told me you are severely impaired with your back and with your feet. So I really appreciate that you managed all the way up here. And I apologize again for me being late, thanks to a disruption in the public transport system here in the London. So again, thank you so much for taking the huge effort on your part of being here. Now that we have arranged your throne, are you sitting comfortable?
I am sitting superly comfortably.
Okay. And this was not the only inconvenience because you and me, we already talked.
Yeah.
And to a technical glitch in the podcast application that I was using, despite us recording video and everything, when it came to the tracks, only the audio tracks were recorded, which is why actually I'm not very unhappy because without it, we would not sit here now. So I'm very happy to meet you face to face. Now, before we start this discussion, I would like to kind of present you to the viewers which may not know you. So you are an actual child Holocaust survivor. Maybe let's start there to encapsulate. What's your background in regards to that specific point?
Well, I think I would describe this particular status or state as Hungarian Jewish Holocaust child survivor. And I put in the Jewish bit, partly because I'm Jewish, and that is the reason why Mr. Hitler and co. were doing their best to get rid of me, but also because Jews were not the only people who were murdered during the Holocaust. There were gypsies, Romas, Sintis, homosexuals, all kinds of people were murdered during the Holocaust, although the largest number was the Jewish population because that was the main aim. But I don't think we should forget anybody else.
Very true. But specifically in regards to you and your own experiences as far as you can remember.
Well, I was very small. In fact, my main job at the time was 1, to be born, 2, to survive. My mother was hiding with false papers, according to which she was an illiterate subclass person, and I was an illegitimate, hang on, that's not the right word, anyway, a bastard child. Like she wasn't supposed to have been married.
Illegitimate, yeah.
How do you say it?
Illegitimate.
Illegitimate, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. But these days, the legitimate word comes up so often in connection with Palestine that I got stuck on that word. Yes, so I was not supposed to be having a father. My mother supposedly wasn't married, and the papers showed that, and she was supposed to be primitive and not schooled. Well, actually, my mother was a piano teacher, and before she became a piano teacher, she was a secretary and a typist. So that's how she worked before she became a piano teacher. And she was a piano teacher for quite a long while by the time the Holocaust reached Budapest. So she was hiding with this false paper, but hiding meant that she was very pregnant and she was working as a cleaner. And she went there it was a hospital, and she went there because she figured out that it was better to give birth to me in the hospital than anywhere else. So she was quite a determined lady. She wanted to make sure that I get born. And then apparently the circumstances were dreadful, and everybody, all other people who worked in that hospital, they all treated her extremely badly, not because she was Jewish, because they didn't know, but because she was a nobody. So this is another important lesson, that you don't have to be Jewish to be persecuted. You can be Jewish, you can be just official. I think it was Protestant on her paper, and you can be still persecuted because you subclass, something like
Untermensch, the Germans called it Untermensch.
Untermensch, yeah. Definitely, yes. Although it's possible that all those people felt that something was not quite right. In my mother's case, that's what she felt after a while, and perhaps that's why they were so horrible to her, because something just didn't fit. Like some of the doctors were very nice to my mother and allowed my mother to do various things which the other people lower down didn't allow. And my mother thought that there is a strong possibility that some of those doctors suspected that something is not as it seems. So, but I was born during the biggest fight between Germans and Russians in Budapest, and that building was in danger, like other people were in danger, and bombs kept falling, and everybody was starving, and my mother either didn't have enough milk or very little, because as soon as I was born, she got up and she carried on working. She didn't have the luxury of having a few days off. And she explained that she always tried to find a good warm place for me. She put me there, and then someone always moved me and put me into the window or whatever. And she felt that they just wanted to get rid of me, they wanted to get rid of her. And I know all of this because she wrote her memoirs.
Is it published? Are they published?
No, but the copies are in the Yad Vashem, in the Vancouver Jewish Museum, in the London Wiener Library, and that's in Hungarian. Type pages, 8 type pages. My mother typed them in March 1945. The war wasn't yet over in Hungary. The war finally finished in Hungary 4th of April 1945. But by the time my mother wrote the memoirs, the Germans and Nazis were heavily defeated by the Russians in Budapest. My mother felt safe, and she came overground and she wrote her memoirs. And I was born with this false name. My name was supposed to be not Agnes Kory, but Agnes Sarkany. And so before my mother left the hospital, because it felt safe, she didn't need to hide anymore, and she decided to go back to her old flat, which then of course was another disappointment. But anyhow, before she did that, she went to the office there and she typed out a different birth certificate for Agnes Kory. And I think she mentioned it to some people in passing, oh, I just wrote another birth certificate, the real one. So I actually never seen the one which was Agnes Sarkany. Don't know what she did with it. She doesn't mention that in the memoir, but she does say that she wrote out a new one. And it was just her. She knew how to do it. She used to be a secretary, and long before, and she managed. But as I say, at that point, my job was to survive, because apparently I kept being very ill because my mother didn't have enough milk, or the milk was bad quality, and it was very, very cold. The conditions were really bad, and apparently a lot of people kept thinking that I was just about to die. They kept telling my mother that, but I didn't, because as my mother said, I was a great fighter, strong fighter.
And you still are.
Yeah. That is what sometimes people tell me, those people who read my mother's memoirs, that, like, I had some issues with my heart 3 years ago, and so I have a pacemaker, and also I had breast cancer 2 years ago. They took out the cancer bit from my breast 2 years ago. I was very nervous because on both occasions I thought, well, I might never wake up. And then some of those people who read the Hungarian memoir said, you will. you survived your babyhood, you survived this. And I did. I woke up and on I go.
And then not only me, but many people are very, very happy that you indeed woke up.
Well, I guess There are also people who would rather that I wasn't going around and
Yes.
causing problems.
And we come to those people too. Yeah. Now I saw that your life actually was dedicated to music. Can I put it like that?
Well, it is my life. Music is my life. I mean, that bag there, which has an extra jumper and a hat, also has now free music scores, because I just went to the library before I came here. I went to a concert last night, which I will review as a voluntary, unpaid music critic. But before I do it, I want to check the scores. I'm very serious about it. So, I mean, I couldn't live without music. Music is not even my passion, it's my life. I was doing music all my life, and I don't understand how anybody can live without music. Anyway, that's what makes me happy. I mean, whatever happens when I'm very, very unwell or whatever, if I listen to what I regard a good performance of a good piece of music, that takes me to cloud nine. That's heaven. And I'm passionate about teaching. I still teach, not as much as I used to, because that's how it worked out, that I now don't have so many pupils as I used to. But as long as anybody wants to study with me, I still teach. And then I still teach by writing my voluntary music reviews, because my reviews are always like little essays. I'm trying to teach everybody, whether they ask for it or not. So I'm very passionate about education. I'm very passionate about music. Music is the number one thing which can make me satisfied, happy, peaceful. Nothing else can do that. But it's got to be good music in a good performance. Now, plenty of good music. Unfortunately, there are not so many good performances, but there are still enough to lit up my spirits when they need to be lit up. So yes, music is my life, but I've been always very political, and I was always very active politically from childhood, like when I was very small, and I kept it going.
Before we move on from music to something else, I would like to mention something very briefly. I interviewed I believe, 84-year-old lady, which is living in the West Bank by choice, and her life too is formed by music. Her name is Rima Tarasi, a very modest, really very modest lady. And what's fascinating about her story is, of course, that she is using music as a kind of therapy in the West Bank to whatever little degree mediate the ongoing trauma that children in the West Bank, of course, have through all this war that's going on. Yeah. So it was a really very profound and deep interview. So just, and we can take this offline later, but I would be happy to connect you two ladies if you would be interested.
You did mention this when we had the online interview 2 or 3 months ago. And then that was that. But you know, I fear that the trauma those Palestinian children and adults go through, provided they're still alive, is not going to be cured by music. When I'm saying
It's
that...
not cured. Yeah, just a little...
When I'm saying that when I'm down, when I'm not feeling well, and this and that, then it's music which can cheer me up. Yeah, but I'm in London. I have a home, just about, I must admit, but nobody is out to bomb me, shoot me, starve me, and kill me. So if my life was in danger, like because of such hostilities, I don't know if music would lift my spirits. Okay, when I had a bit of a scare about the cancer and the heart, music did lift my spirit. But if I knew that I'm going to be shot at any moment, I don't know if music could do anything. So I feel sorry for the lady in the West.
She doesn't feel sorry. She doesn't feel sorry. She said at the end of the interview, and I'm paraphrasing here, I refuse to give up. Again, I'm paraphrasing here. She refused to lose hope. She refused to surrender to this violence. So it was an incredible, strong interview. Yeah.
Well, they have incredible power and resistance, but and I still have a little bit of hope. Otherwise, I wouldn't carry on with my activism. But the reality is that the Israelis want to kill all Palestinians, and they have the facility to do so. They didn't manage to kill all the Jews, but I fear that they're aiming to kill all the Palestinians, who are not that large in number. I don't know.
So to clarify for the viewers, so you said they didn't manage to kill all Jews. So you mean the Germans did not manage to kill all Jews? So the Israelis may not be able to kill all Palestinians?
Well, I hope not, but I fear that they might succeed because they are very powerful and they get very strong support from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from Europe. Now, the Nazis didn't get all that much support, or did they get any? I don't know. I don't recall the Americans going to war to help the Nazis.
On the contrary, the Americans did everything they could to prevent any Jewish refugees, same as Great Britain or the rest of Europe, to prevent any Jewish refugees during the Second World War, knowing full well, we know this from declassified documents, so the Americans and the British, they knew what's going on, despite that they did everything they could not to allow any Jewish refugees.
Yes, but what you're saying is absolutely correct, but that's not what I was saying. I was saying that, and I'm sorry if I wasn't clear, I was saying that right now the Israelis have tangible support from America, from the United Kingdom, from Europe. They're getting all the weapons and they can keep on killing Palestinians. The Nazis themselves didn't have that support at the time. The United States didn't support the Nazis, and the United Kingdom, as far as I know, didn't support the Nazis. In other words, after a while, the Nazis collapsed, and thanks to mainly to the Russians. But at the moment, and the Jews who were not murdered until that point, they survived. But I fear that with all the support the Israelis get, they just may try to murder or may murder all the Palestinians, but I do hope that they will not succeed. So I have the fear, but...
I interviewed Professor Omar Bartov. I don't know if you know
him.
Oh
yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah. And he said something to me that always stuck with me. He said, again, I make it very black and white. There is a linear transgression to genocide. And it begins with dehumanization, which we clearly see. Israel is dehumanizing Palestinians. The next step is ethnic cleansing, which we clearly also see. I think it's even more ongoing than we realize because no press is allowed in there. And then he said, and if you can't get rid of them, you kill them. Yeah. So this is also partly what we already see, and I don't want to go into semantics. Is it a genocide or not? That's a futile discussion, because there are estimates that between 200,000 and 600,000 Palestinians have died so far. These are not the official numbers, of course. They're much lower. They talk about 60, 70,000. Yeah. But I've talked with a number of diplomats, and they confirm between 200,000 and 600,000 killed Palestinians. Now, if you realize that what in the West Bank, what was it, 2 million something? Yeah, that's more than 10% of the population.
And they continue.
And they continue.
And so they're putting now the Palestinians into a very small area. It's a concentration camp. And from that comes the final solution. The Nazis called it final solution, and so that's what they're doing. And they keep murdering people every day, and they keep saying, oh, they're Hamas terrorists. Well, they call everybody a Hamas terrorist. So anyway, they're trying to murder all Palestinians. And every now and again, I hope that the world will wake up and will put a stop to it, a proper stop to it. So far, it hasn't happened. But, I mean, I was elated when Zohar Mandani was elected in New York.
Against massive resistance.
Because there are more Jews in New York than in Israel, apparently. I didn't count them, but it's a very large Jewish population. And they did elect an anti-murder, anti-Zionist Muslim candidate. Now that, I think, was a miracle. And this sort of thing keeps my hope up.
Very true. And there was something else that I found a miracle, because Trump also extremely opposed, of course, Mandani. And Trump, in the last week or so, he made a U-turn. Suddenly, he's the best buddy of Mandani.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything, because tomorrow Mr. Trump might make another U-turn, followed by yet another U-turn the following day. I mean, he's been doing that with Zelensky as well, so the Ukrainian guy. So, but obviously Trump realizes that a lot of people wanted, and Trump is a populist. If he thinks that the wind blows in that direction, he turns that direction for a while to see if the wind will change direction. Going back to Omar Bartov, yes, he's of course absolutely right. In Hungary, the first Jewish laws were introduced in 1920. They were not called Jewish laws, it was called the numerous clauses. They decided that the various ethnicities in Hungary should be represented according to their percentages at universities. Now, around that time, most university students were Jewish. So basically it was an anti-Jewish measure, although at that time they didn't declare it, but they did say that only 5% of the student population can be Jewish, because only 5% of the population is Jewish, something like that. So at that point, quite a lot of Jewish students went abroad, studies elsewhere, in Germany, France, wherever. But that was a sort of minor anti-Semitic law. In 1938, but the interesting thing about that is, just to go back, that was about 15 years before the German Nazi Nuremberg laws, which started to restrict Jews. So Hungary preceded Germany. And then in 1938, the Hungarians brought in the first pretty severe Jewish laws that they did already on the strength of the German Nazi laws in Germany. They were kind of following Hitler and co. some restriction came in regarding work opportunities. It was still not a threat to life, but it was an inconvenience, and Jews were singled out, and this was an official law against Jews. The numerous clauses didn't say that this is against Jews. They just knew it was against Jews because of the large number of Jewish university students. But the 1938 Act was a Jewish act, so, and they spelled it out. And in 1939, they made another Jewish act, and it was much stricter. At that point, even fewer people were given work opportunities. So it's like with the Palestinians, you know, there were nowhere for them to work. If you don't work, you starve to death, and so on. So they were already dehumanized by virtue of not being able to make a living and live as normal human beings. So that started in 1939. The dreadful killing in Hungary itself started in October 1944, when the then government just disappeared, and we had the Iron Cross Party taking over. They were the cruelest fascists, sadistic fascists you could have thought of. And then they went around and they were just killing Jews. They didn't last all that long because, thank God, the Russians came in and they put a stop to these people. So otherwise they would have killed all the Jews in Hungary. Having said that, in 1941, 20,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered in what is now Ukraine. They were mainly from rural Hungary, and they were mainly refugees from Poland, where anti-Semitism was already very ripe. So this killing took place in Kamanyec-Podilsky. I think it had a Hungarian name as well, Körösmező, because that area kept changing hands. Sometimes it was Hungary, sometimes it was Russia, sometimes Romania. But it did have a Hungarian name, Körösmező. But I think it's known by historians as Kamanyec-Podilsky. And that was Kamanyec-Podilsky, but it's definitely Kamanyec. Either Podilsky or Posilsky. Suddenly I can't remember. I remember the Hungarian name very clearly, Körösmező. But in the same year, 1941, 34,000 other Jews were murdered in Babi Yar, not all that far from Kamanyec-Podilsky, also in the Ukraine. But the Babi Yar murders did not have Hungarian victims, but the Körösmező victims, they were Hungarian Jews from rural Hungary, often with Polish parents or grandparents. So there was something foreign about them, or they were rural.
So your mother survived all of that?
Sorry?
So your mother survived all of that?
My mother was not in rural Hungary, and my mother was not alien in any way, like any Polish or... So they started off in 1941 by getting rid of 20,000 Jews who lived in Hungary, but who had foreign origins. It's just like what Trump and now the UK is doing. You get rid of the people who have foreign origins, or their parents, or they were refugees themselves. And they sent them to Körösmező, and they were murdered there. But the rest of the Hungarian Jews started to be deported to Auschwitz and places like that a little bit later. And that was very much speeded up when the Iron Cross government took over in October 1944. But already during the Horthy government, which was before the Iron Cross and which was like several decades, Horthy government, Miklos Horthy's government lasted several decades. They already deported Jews. On the quiet, they didn't particularly advertise, but then the Nazis didn't advertise what they did either. The Israelis are very proud of what they're doing, and they videoing it, and they publicize it, and they say, we killed another 100 Hamas terrorists. So the Israelis publicize the murder of Palestinians, and they use the excuse that they were Hamas terrorists. According to the Israelis, the whole Palestinian population, they are all Hamas terrorists.
Even the kids.
Even the kids, because they're going to grow up to be Hamas terrorists.
Exactly.
And some of these Israeli politicians say that there is no... I've seen them on TV.
Amalek. I mean, Netanyahu talked about Amalek.
That's right.
Means killing women, children, donkeys, dogs, everything.
Yeah. And there are no innocent Palestinians, they say.
But there are many similarities. I go on very thin ice. I know, again, I make it black and white. Yeah. But there are many similarities between, let's say, Nazi Germany and Israel. Why is that? Again, I don't want to go into semantics and exact numbers, because if you're one of those 200 to 600,000 Palestinians, it doesn't really matter to you. Even
Bob.
Exactly. Yeah. But what I find interesting is that the Germans were so convinced that they win the war, they recorded everything. And now today we see exactly the same thing on the Israeli side. So much so that now Israel starts to erase social media posts where they actually filmed themselves committing war crimes. Yeah? There's only one tiny little challenge for Israel, even for the mighty Israeli Unit 8200, the cyber warfare unit. There is what's called a time back machine for the internet. So they can erase what's on now on the social medias, but the record will, or at least some of the record will remain. And it might be that in someday in the future, when we will have museums in regards to the, however you call it, massacres in Palestine today, that are equivalent to the museums that we have about the Holocaust. And we might see convictions in the international court, like we had in Nuremberg, where Nazi officials were convicted based on recorded information. The same might happen, yeah, someday in the future with Israelis who recorded themselves committing war crimes. And one last thing, I saw images coming out of Gaza today in color, which, if you lay them next to images that we saw in 1948 coming out of Germany in black and white, you wouldn't be able to make a difference. They're starved kids, skeletized adults, mass graves, all these kind of things. So it's very similar. The only difference today is, I believe, we are not yet at the numbers, comparable to Germany, but the intent is very similar. The Germans wanted to eradicate the Jewish race, and as you said, there are indicators, and I've spoken with quite a number of academics who agree that the actual aim of Israel is to get rid of the Palestinians in all of Greater Israel. One last thing, and I'll come back to you in a second. Many people compare the apartheid in Israel with the apartheid in South Africa, but it's a wrong comparison. Why? South Africa never wanted to kill the black population, they wanted to exploit them. In Israel today, that's a total different story. Although there's a very repressive apartheid regime, Amnesty International called it automated apartheid, cameras with facial recognition and machine guns on top. Yeah. So coming back to Germany and the present, there are many similarities. I do not say it's equal. I do not say it's the same, but there are many similarities between then and now. And now I have a witness to this history sitting in front of me who has experienced this horror of that past for you not so distant past. And now I have a very specific question. It would have been very easy with your background to fall in the same trap that many other people did, the trap of hate. Yeah, hate against, that's actually a good one. So the Germans committed the genocide, but the Israelis hate the Palestinians. That's kind of an oxymoron. Yeah? But it would have been very easy for you to fall in this kind of hate trap, and we need security and everything is justified because we need security. What made you different? Why are you have open eyes and you jump the own paradigm, the own worldview? So what made you different?
Yes, I mean, it is quite heartbreaking how many Jews are totally defensive. Israel can't do anything wrong, and there is no genocide, no discrimination against the Palestinians. Everything is fine. All of it is just Hamas propaganda. Now, before I say why I feel differently, and by the way, I'm not the only one. As you know, you have already interviewed a few people, and on these marches in London, there is always the Jewish bloc, and also there is IGEN Friday evenings, the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, which is also it's Jewish led, and they don't think the same way as unfortunately the majority of Jews think. But first, let me say why I think that far too many Jews think the way they do. I find it heartbreaking, but they are permanently, constantly brainwashed, but constantly. So I'm trying to counter it all the time, which is difficult. I mean, for instance, I attend a Zoom meeting every Friday morning. It is about 100 people, not in London. It's somewhere north of London. I don't want to mention now the name of the city, but it's there. It's organized there, but it's online, and somehow I just joined. I mean, someone invited me when there was a Hungarian Jew doing a presentation, and then I just stayed on. Every single week, they keep worrying about Israel. It's about 100 people each week on that call. And each week they have some presentation which just reinforces that this pro-Palestinian marches, and in America, the campus, and now at university campus, these are all anti-Semitic. They're all anti-Semitic. They all go against the Jews. And so they're being brainwashed, they believe it, they feel insecure. And they think they are in danger where they are not in danger. Now, most heartbreakingly, I know even very clever, intelligent, educated Jewish people who believe this. Because I have arguments with them. So they believe it because they feel insecure for whatever reason, and because they allow the media to brainwash them. Not just the media, but those people, the fascists. I mean, the chief rabbi makes speeches all the time saying that this is anti-Semitism, and they try to get the narrative, and this is not on all the time in the UK. So even Jews who didn't feel unsafe like 2 years ago, now they feel unsafe because they are being told all the time that they are unsafe. Okay, so why I think differently? First of all, because nobody can brainwash me. I've got an independent mind. I check.
So from the very beginning, from early childhood on, so when did you kind of realize what your own stances are vis-a-vis the Israel-Palestine?
Oh, recently. So In my upbringing, the Holocaust was a permanent topic because that's what the people who survived it, they talked about it. Although I know that there are a lot of Holocaust survivors who don't talk about it, but in my surrounding, they talked about it. My mother and father, my aunt, my uncle, they talked about it all the time. I went to a Jewish kindergarten when I was 3 or something, and even there I remember hearing some stuff. And that's one thing which I kept hearing, and the other thing is going to Eretz Israel. So that's where the Jews are safe, and we're going to go to Eretz Israel. Now, come the Hungarian Revolution or counter-revolution, it depends on which side you were, in 1956. And then a lot of Jews took the opportunity in Hungary, and they did go to Eretz Israel, finally at home. So, by default, I was a Zionist, because going to live in Eretz Israel, that's what the Zionist aim is. So, all those years I was a Zionist. I knew absolutely nothing about Palestinians. I just knew that there was an empty land with plenty of space for Jews to return to their ancient homeland.
A land without people for people without land.
Yeah, exactly. And so I decided, and I came to England to study, and I decided that when I got myself a diploma, that's when I'm going to move to Israel and settle, Aliyah, go to my home. And I did that in the early 1980s. By then I had my diploma, performer diploma, and I went to Israel for 4 weeks. And I was always very left-wing, so I decided I was going to go and live in a kibbutz. So I went for 4 weeks because I wanted to check out a few kibbutz to see which were how. Also, I was able to go because I met some South African Jews who emigrated to Israel, and I met them in London, and they invited me that if I want to go and stay. So I had hospitality from where I could go and look around. So I did go there. I did stay with them for 9 days. The first thing which happened in Jerusalem, the first thing which happened when, like the first day, second day, I noticed that different cars had different car plates. Some of them were blue, some of them were yellow. So I asked why, and they said, oh, some for the Israeli Jews, some for the Israeli Arabs. My heart sunk. That was in the early 1980s. What? I mean, what is this discrimination? I was very disturbed by that. I didn't like what the South African hosts of mine kept saying, that, oh, the Arabs, they're so primitive, they're so uneducated, like all of them. And I thought, that's what they thought about the blacks as well in South Africa. So we did have a row, and I moved out, and I was just staying all over the place. I can't remember how I managed, but I did manage. I also went to check out some kibbutz, and I didn't see any Arabs there. But I heard some unpleasant comments. So I came back. That was in the 1980s. And I decided...
You came back to
England. So I decided, and because originally I came to England in October 1965, 9 years after the so-called revolution, counter-revolution, also in Budapest. That was October 56. I came to England October 65, the other way around. So by the time, and then I got my diploma and etc., etc. And in the early 1980s, I went to Israel to prepare the ground for me to make Aliyah, but I came back. However, I still thought I was a Zionist who is critical of what's going on there. And I remember I had some argument with some other hosts I landed with, and it's an American family, and they said, look, we are the occupiers. Considering how occupiers behave, compared to that, we're not that bad. So, but they acknowledged that they occupied and that they didn't give a fair chance to those who were occupied. So I was critical about that, but I still did not declare to myself that Israel is not the home of the Jews. And because I'm Jewish, therefore, that was a Zionistic point of view. I didn't analyze it. It was by default from birth that I was Zionist. And then I went back to Israel. I was invited to present a Holocaust paper at a conference at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. That was 3 years ago. Very nice, a lot of educated Jews, a lot of interesting papers, and it was a five days conference. I went for 3. And again, I met a few Israeli Arabs, even on the campus. And I had some short conversations with them, and it did turn out that they didn't have the same right as the Israeli Jews. So I came back again with a bad taste, and I just didn't think about it until 7th of October 2023. Immediately I thought, if the Israelis did not want that happen, it would have not happened. That was my first thought. Because they're so mighty with their security and their military. And I still think that if the Israelis did not want that happen, it would have not happened. Now, if I now went out and made this statement, I would be arrested, I guess. Yeah, I mean, no.
You mean in Israel or in the UK?
Oh, here. The British government now arrests anybody who is pro-Palestinian. And for like conspiracy theories. I mean, when I say that if the Israelis did not want that happen, it wouldn't have happened, I'm doing it the most diplomatic way I can do. But I think there was more to it. There's been lots of examples in history to do a provocation, which then would become an excuse for wholesale attack. Now, it has been admitted by all kind of sources that the Israeli government was warned.
Twice by Egypt, we know for a fact. Yeah.
And also by the own military, some ladies who were watching the thing. And
exactly, the border guards, female border guards, yes.
Yeah, and they were just not listening to women, they don't know what they're talking about. So they were warned. Even if it wasn't instigated that it should happen, they were warned. And the other thing is, Israel is a very small country. It doesn't take long to go from one part of Israel to the other. Yeah. But the Israeli army, the IDF, the very badly named IDF, took a long time to get to those kibbutzim, whom the Israeli government didn't like anyway, because those kibbutzim in the south were the people who were trying to build coexistence with Palestinians. They were left-wing kibbutzim. And the Israeli government was perfectly happy to sacrifice them for the greater land of Israel. We also know about the Hannibal Project.
Hannibal Directive. Yeah.
Hannibal Directive. They do not want Israelis to be captured. They prefer to kill those Israelis. And we do know that the IDF did kill several people on the ground, several Israelis. I do not think that Hamas wanted to kill anybody. My own theory, logic, immediate thought was that they were hoping to do a prisoner exchange, because the number of Palestinians held in prisons without any charge was very large.
In the thousands.
And in the past, Hamas managed to do some exchange. And I think that's what they wanted to do again. They were not going in to kill the Jews. They went in to free Palestinians. And then I saw within a day the response of the Israeli government, and that was a pretty major waking up call for me. And since then, it's been downhill all the time. I mean, I still kept saying that I'm not anti-Zionist, but I am very critical of Israel. And I kept this up for quite a long time. And I went to marches and protests, and I was standing with the International Anti-Jewish Network pickets, and I kept telling them, but you know, I'm not anti-Zionist, I'm just critical of Israel. And they said, yeah. But then finally, on the 2nd of May, 2025, I was so outraged by what I can only call a Zionist mob here in London that I thought these were fascists. If they are Zionist, I'm anti-Zionist. And that was, there was a picket, an anti, again the IGEN picket. We were reading the names of the murdered Palestinian children, and wound up by the Board of Deputies, which is the British Board of Jewish Deputies, who sent out a circular to all their members, which is about 300 synagogues in the United Kingdom, saying that, oh, there's going to be this anti-Semitic, they always say it's anti-Semitic, it's going to be this anti-Semitic protest picket, we must defend the Jews. So there were about 30 of us on the IGEN side. We were reading the names of the murdered Palestinian children, and then there were about 100 people on the other side, totally brainwashed, stupid Jewish people, unfortunately several young people as well, and several non-Jews from the far right with the St. George flags. And so that was the first time I saw the far right supporting Zionism. So at that point I thought, if that is Zionism and these are the people who support it, I'm not only critical of Israel policies, from now on I'm anti-Zionist. That was 2nd of May 2025.
It's amazing. So I just discovered there is apparently a massive lapse in my research. I thought this is going much further back. So I mean, this makes your voice even stronger. Now, I interviewed a number of people who had this kind of change in, I don't want to say point of view. It's not significant enough. Maybe worldview later in life. Yeah, I had a gentleman who was member of AIPAC. I interviewed. Anyway, I have a number of guest speakers on my channel who later in life came to realize that what they believed most of their life was a flawed view, to say it mildly. And sometimes I detected a certain regret between the lines for not having realized earlier. Yeah. But my argument is it takes courage and it has effects, consequent effects when you, jobs, friends, family, social environment, finance, there is a price tag when you later in life, career, yeah. A number of academics I spoke who lost their careers for speaking out, right? Now,
Can I just come back?
please.
I was researching the Holocaust. I was researching what the European Nazis did against European Jews. In particular, I was researching the lives and works of murdered Jewish Hungarian musicians. But while I was doing that, I was researching the history because I wanted to understand how we got where we got to. So I went back a bit. So I've been researching for 65 years. I mentioned that my mother wrote her memoirs about the circumstances of my birth and what preceded it. It is an incredible piece of writing in Hungarian, in the original Hungarian, because it's a piece of Hungarian Jewish history, a piece of Jewish history, a piece of Hungarian history. So she did recount what happened 5 years, 10 years before, and how we got where we got to. When I was 13, she presented these memoirs to me. And she put in an extra page, put it on the top, saying that to my darling little Agnes, so that you learn and fight that such times about which I'm writing here should never be repeated. So I took that on board, and within 2 years I became a Holocaust researcher, and I did give a lot of presentations on various Hungarian Jewish composers, musicians who were murdered, and then kind of occasion also about terrorism, because people ask me so much about terrorism that I looked into that. I wanted to be knowledgeable about that. It wasn't my specialty, but I wanted to know what happened and what preceded it and so on. So basically, I was a Holocaust researcher all my life. So now what I saw, what was happening to the Palestinians, I recognized from my Holocaust research. And every time there is another incident, individual or group or starvation or ghettos, concentration camps, refugee camps, whatever, I could find a parallel in my Holocaust research. So what I was seeing since, and what I am seeing since 7th of October 2023 is what I saw in archives, in documentation for the past 65 years. The difference is that the Holocaust was done to the Jews. And this genocide, Holocaust, whatever you call it, is done by the Jews. Although I'm not so convinced that they are all really Jews, apart from the fact that Jewish values real Jewish values wouldn't allow all of that, in my opinion. I'm not a scholar on religion because I'm totally secular, but there is no religion which says just kill, 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 and kill. So I don't think that this is, in spite of Amalek, I think the problem is more Netanyahu than the Jewish religion. However, and I lose my own thread. I wanted to say something deeply profound. Well, how did I start this last chain of thoughts?
Your mother's memoirs.
Yeah,
She
and
presented.
that's what got me to do the research, and that during the research, oh yeah, no, I know where I lost the thread. That not all those people who support what's happening now against the Palestinians are really Jewish. A lot of my Jewish friends ditched me over the past 2 years. Hence, I have a lot fewer pupils than I ever had before. Some of them already ditched me in 2015 when I stood up for Jeremy Corbyn, saying that no, he's not an anti-Semite. I know what anti-Semitism is, and that's not Jeremy Corbyn. So I lost a large number of Jewish pupils then and Jewish friends. So eventually I lost almost all of them. However, there is one person I ditched, and I told her so. This is a lady who's been a friend of mine for about 25 years, Hungarian. She likes to think that she is Jewish. I don't think she is Jewish. For sure, her father was not Jewish. She comes from a very eminent, very well-known Hungarian family. I know where they are all buried, and they're very, very well known. It's definitely not a Jewish family. She claims that her mother was a foundling, and she thinks that the birth mother of her mother was Jewish, but she can't prove it because of this and that. I don't think that my ex-friend's mother was Jewish. She does like thinking and feeling that she's Jewish, and yeah, her last husband, her fourth, was Jewish, very strongly anti-Arab and Jewish. So they did make Aliyah about 4 or 5 years ago. But she's not Jewish. She never converted, she just likes to think, and she is always talking against Arabs. And she told me when all this killing started that, well, we must do that because we need our safety and security. She has 2 very comfortable flats and a pension in Budapest. She has a very comfortable flat and benefits and a pension in London. She doesn't need security in Israel when she's not even Jewish. But the Israeli administration accepted her, even though she can't prove that she's Jewish, but she's very anti-Arab, so that's a qualification. And when I argued her that, look, neither your mother nor your father was Jewish. And she said, but now you count as a Jew in Israel if one of your grandparents was Jewish. That was the law when the Hungarian Jewish laws came in, that if one of your grandparents were Jewish, you counted as a Jew. So that was a Nazi law. Now, the Israelis say, if one of your 4 grandparents was Jewish, you count as a Jew. So I think an awful lot of people go into Israel now, and they feel good because they're superior to the Arabs, and they fight against them, and they dehumanize them because it makes them feel good, and they're not even Jewish.
Israel definitely needs people, so much so, and I refer back to Professor Avi Schleim, which I believe you know.
I know who he is, he doesn't know me.
Okay. I interviewed him twice. Actually, I was yesterday interviewing someone from the Oxford University, Yasamina Mathar, Iranian background, and she knows Avi Schleim very well. And actually, we ate in the same restaurant, and I invited Avi Schleim yesterday. It was on short notice, he had to decline, but I interviewed him twice. So I'm saying this because Avi Schleim is also an academic and researcher, and he brought up, or he investigated the Jewish attacks on Jewish targets in Egypt and in Iraq, where Professor Avi Schleim comes from.
Yeah.
And in one of those interviews, he told me with a huge smile, and now I found the smoking gun. So what Israel did in these cases was to, as I said already, bomb Jewish targets in those countries in order to scare the Jewish population of leaving their homelands where they have been for generations and migrate to Israel, where they were received as second or third class citizens. So coming back to what you said, Israel needs people. They want the demographic to be Jewish. And that brings me linea recta to Professor Benny Morris, whom I also interviewed, who told me...
Professor?
Benny Morris.
Oh.
He's one of those so-called new historians, together with Ilan Pappé, Avi Schleim. What makes them special in one sense, or they had access to the Israeli States Archive in the 1980s.
Sure. Yeah. And Moshe Makover.
There are 5 or 6 which are in this kind of...
and Chaim.
Chaim Breshis too. Yeah. I interviewed him too.
Yeah, I know.
So they had some access to the Israeli States Archives, then they published their books. Israel didn't like it, so till today, to my knowledge, the Israeli States Archives are closed, even for academic research. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So that's why I bring this up. So Israel is definitely interested in drawing people into Israel because, and that brings me what I wanted to say about Professor Benny Morris. He told me in an interview, if we would accept all the Arabs in Israel, Israel would overnight no longer be a Jewish state. And he said, and I quote, "And I don't want that." Right? So Benny Morris is special in that sense that in his earlier years, he wrote, as an academic about the things, how he found them. And now he made a new turn, also in the last couple of years, he made a U-turn and criticizes even his own work. Yeah. So that was one of the statements was Ben Gurion made a mistake. He should have driven all the Arabs out and we wouldn't have the problem today. So he's quite, he really made a U-turn. But again, I only mention this in context with Professor Avi Schleim, where it was clear, and up until today, this is the case, that Israel needs people, right? And the security argument, we need Israel because, if something happens, whilst Israel today is the most unsafe place on earth for any Jews. In no other country in the world die as many Jews as in Israel. Yeah. Again, that was me talking too much. I just wanted to mention there is an incentive for the Israeli state to draw people in, even on questionable arguments like the ones of your former friend.
Yeah, but my point here is that they're letting non-Jews in as long as they are not Arabs.
Yeah, for the reasons that I just explained.
Yeah. And they're inviting Tommy Robinson of fame as a guest of the Israeli government, and they treated him like a very important guest about a month ago for 5 days. All expenses paid. Apparently he spoke to the Knesset. I'm not sure, but I think he did, or he was scheduled to speak to the Knesset. A far-right, fascist, racist, but he's not an Arab. So the Israeli government wants anybody who is not Arab, who is not Palestinian.
You just said something interesting, and I actually wrote it down before, far right. So maybe you can help me here. There's something I don't understand. In the past, far right was associated with anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah.
And today, the far right is best friends with Israel. So how did this happen?
Well, the quick answer is that they hate the Arabs even more than they hate the Jews. That's my first instinct. The second one, that they are probably financed to now stand with Israel. I mean, Tommy Robinson was financed for his trip. He had his fare paid. He was a guest. He had his hotel rooms, meals. So there is Zionist money there. the only reason I'm not saying that Jewish money, because that would bring me back to the proper, real anti-Semitism, which Hitler kept pursuing, that the Jews rule the whole world, and oh God, there's no end to it. So, the conclusion to one of the main questions you had, that how come that I think the way I think, is because I see history repeating itself, except that the Jews were oppressed 80 years ago, and now they are the oppressors, and those who are not the active oppressors, they are being brainwashed that that's the right thing to do. And you mentioned Avishalaim and the Jews in Iraq and Iran. And I mentioned that I go to these Friday mornings lectures. I've been doing that now for about a year. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was about how the dreadful Muslim anti-Semitism forced the Jews of Iraq and Iran to leave. So we have that narrative pushed as well. So they're rewriting the history. They're totally rewriting the history.
Which, by the way, is a total false narrative.
Sorry?
Which, by the way, is a total false narrative. There was no anti-Semitism neither in Egypt nor in Iraq prior to Israel bombing Jewish targets in those countries.
I'm absolutely sure. And when I got kicked out by my host, with whom I stayed in Jerusalem in the early 1980s, because I kept arguing, and they, the South African Jewish people now living in Israel, they kept telling me that the Arabs, they're primitive, uneducated, all that. And as I argued, and my stomach was turning, and so I got kicked out after 9 days or 8 days, I can't remember. And then I was just going around everywhere, found accommodation until my flight ticket for return to England. And I ended up, among other places, in Haifa, and I met a then 80-year-old Hungarian Jewish lady in Haifa who actually emigrated to Israel in the 1930s. So she escaped all the Jewish laws and the Holocaust in time. And she did go from rural Hungary, so perhaps she had an inkling, I don't know. But what she did tell me, and I stayed with her for 2 nights, and it was in Haifa, I have to emphasize it because it's a bit different from the rest of Israel. She said to me in the early 1980s, and she was around 80 at that time, that we Jews and Arabs lived perfectly happily together until the Americans and English came in.
Until.
And I'll never forget that.
Yeah. I interviewed 2 survivors from the 1948 massacre in Tantura. Does the name ring a bell?
Yeah.
Tantura? Okay.
Yeah.
The lady I interviewed in Amman, and the gentleman I interviewed in Germany. Both died within the last 3 months. It's very, yeah. So I'm very grateful that I could, yeah. They said exactly the same. Prior to Israel coming in, they lived in peace with Christians, with Muslims, with, yeah. So this is really an artificial implant. Also the Zionist project is really an artificial implant in the region, which kind of poisoned the whole, yeah.
Yeah.
And you said another interesting thing, brainwashed, you said a couple of times, yeah. So I interviewed Professor Nurit Pelet El-Hanan. She is the sister from Miko Pelet. Their grandfather was a co-signatory of the Israeli Charter of Independence. Their father was a famous general in the 1967 war. It's quite a remarkable family. After the 67 war was won, their father said, okay, now we won, we need peace, which is why they kind of sidelined him, but there's more. Nurit Pelet lost her 14-year-old daughter to a suicide bomber in Jerusalem. And one of the conditions that she had for the interview was, we can discuss everything except my personal tragedy. Yeah, that's a family that too could have turned to hate.
Yeah.
But they turned to understanding. Now, in contrast to Nurit Pelet, her husband Rami talks about these things. I interviewed him too. Incidentally, there is a Palestinian father who also lost, I think, an 11 or 12-year daughter, which exited a candy store and was shot by an 18 or 19-year-old Israeli sniper. So those two fathers tour the world and talk about their experiences, right? Now, and it's a bit a long winding ramp up, but an Irish writer wrote a book, and I have to confess I forgot the title now, but I read it. It's an extraordinary book. The Pope read the book, and Nurit told me in the interview, yeah, the Pope invited my husband twice. Yeah, so I said, so when is he going? Ah, he was already. Yeah, so it's really remarkable. So. And this is what I really find so extraordinary. There are people who had an opportunity to turn to hate, to turn against, support. Instead, they kind of use this kind of trigger to wake up, right? So there is a way to kind of escape this brainwashing. What I want to say, one last thing. So Nurit Pelet and Hanan researched racism in Israeli school books. And her words, she said what she found was pornography of evil, meaning they're using the Holocaust to indoctrinate the young people.
Yes.
Yeah. Then the next step is I interviewed Emeritus Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, who investigated the Israeli army's use of religious texts to further indoctrinate. So from early childhood on, throughout the school, the kids are indoctrinated. Then they come to the army, and they're further indoctrinated.
Yeah, I know.
So this is what you said, brainwashed. It's a very sophisticated, intergenerational mind control propaganda system that Israel applied already since whatever, its inception, actually.
And it is now being applied outside Israel as well.
Yep.
And I would like to say something, but I'm not feeling very hot. So I wonder whether I can take off one layer. So I would like to say something, that this indoctrination and brainwashing is now applied all the time in England. And what they're doing is anti-Semitism, 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 anti-Semitism. No end to it. In places where it should not be mentioned at all, not only because it's not true, but because it's a place where such things shouldn't be mentioned. So let me give you a very recent example, like this week, like the day before yesterday. So I am a patient governor in one very big London hospital and a member in another very big London hospital. And
just to explain, what is a patient governor?
Well, it's a voluntary thing to assist management to and represent patients and assist management to provide as good service to patients as possible. That's a patient governor. I'm a patient governor in one of the big hospitals in London, but I'm only a member, which is just a grade below, in another big London hospital, because you can't be a patient governor in more than one hospital. Anyhow, so I went to the AGM, the annual general meeting, to one of these, Wednesday evening. And the top management turns up, and there are about 100 people, members and specially invited people or whatever. And the idea is that they tell you what they did in the last year or last 6 months in the hospital, their investments and expenditures and income and research and special treatment. So it's basically, that's what it is. But, much to my surprise, on this occasion, both the chief executive director as well the chief trust chair, they both said in their speeches that we are living in very difficult times, and with this horrific attack against Manchester Jews, we want to reassure everybody that we are not accepting anti-Semitism. We make sure that it doesn't happen in our hospital and so on. I couldn't believe my ears. So when it came to the question-answer session, I did not want to put them on the spot. I was just asking my medical questions, a couple of medical questions. But as soon as it's finished, I went up to both of them. They were sitting next to each other. One of them said immediately, "Oh, hello, Agnes, how are you?" And as a gentleman, can I please raise a point? There was one man who knifed one other man in Manchester in a synagogue. Wasn't a good idea, but as even Phil Rosenberg, who is the chair of the British Board of Jewish Deputies, announced that was the first such attack in the United Kingdom since medieval times. Why do you talk about dreadful anti-Semitism? So one of these chief executive who said, "How are you, Agnes?" immediately got off his chair and disappeared. The other one, and that's credit to him, he said, we are expected to say this. So I think it's dreadful, utterly dreadful. Why don't anybody complain about attacks on Muslims, which is a regular thing, and on mosques, it's regular. So there was this one single person who decided to go and kill Jews at the Manchester synagogue with a knife. Not a very sophisticated terrorist, I would say. He didn't get very far. Two Jews were killed, one by this man with a knife, the other one
by accident, yeah,
by the stupid police.
Yeah.
Who can't they don't see what they're doing. They were just shooting.
Yeah.
I don't know why they were shooting when they must have known that there are people inside. So I don't call it an accident, I call it a ridiculous mistake. Careless. I mean, it was an unnecessary death.
I saw the original images, and what surprised me, the person, this kind of innocent bystander who got killed, was laying there, dying, and absolutely nobody cared about him. So even after the shooting, when they must have been realizing that, well, yeah, that struck me, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not very efficient. The IDF is much more efficient than the British police. Not very funny. But my point here is that in order to help Israel, the narrative in the United Kingdom is being pushed like anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. So people keep hearing it. So people think there is anti-Semitism when there isn't any.
The BBC is pushing this to the extreme. So I believe the BBC, that's actually a question. You live here, I don't live here. Yeah? After October the 7th, do you think that the BBC has even lost more credibility than it had already lost before?
Well, interestingly, I think so. But the interesting thing is that, for instance, this particular group I'm talked about not in London, it's north, 2.5 hours train north from London. And I attend the Friday mornings presentations every Friday. And they bitterly complain about the BBC because they think that the BBC is
Not enough.
biased
Yeah.
the other way around. And today I couldn't stay for the whole lecture by the gentleman, by the man who did his lecture today, because I needed to get to my swimming earlier in order to get to you in time.
Thank you.
But I did hear about 15 minutes of him, or 20 minutes, plus I read some of his pieces in newspapers. He's not an unknown person. And he was attacking the police, that they are biased against Jews, and was complaining that in Birmingham they stopped the Maccabee fans coming because the police was lying about this and that. That's what he was going on about today. And also, so basically, people on that side, they keep complaining about the BBC. So you know what? Poor BBC. They can't do anything right because us, anti-Zionist Jews and pro-Palestinians, we think that the BBC is dreadfully biased for Israel against the Palestinians. And I could bring you lots of examples. But then you get this guy and many other people who keep saying that the BBC is biased against Israel and the BBC is pro-Palestinian. So, poor BBC.
Yeah, the BBC is in the headlines right now because they kind of how shall I say this, edited creatively
Donald Trump.
a speech of Donald Trump, and I mean,
as if it made any difference.
Yeah. But still, they got caught red-handed. I believe this is not an isolated incident. I mean, we have seen this in the past. Very famous. There was a reporter kind of supposedly being, in an extremely dangerous position, laying on the ground, and kind of wartime reporter, and it was all fake. Yeah. So yeah, it's television. Yeah. So the BBC.
Also, they have a lot of very mediocre, ignorant producers who don't know what they're doing. I challenged one set in connection with music, and in fact, in connection with Holocaust music, they presented, well, they didn't even present facts incorrectly. They presented lies for no particular reason except out of ignorance. And when I kept complaining and asked them to change, they couldn't be bothered. So they don't really care. There are a lot of producers there, lots of producers and people higher up. They're getting their salaries, so what do they care whether they made some mistakes or not?
I'm in contact with two different journalists for the BBC on two different continents, and they're both telling me independently, if they would report the truth, they would be fired next day.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Yeah. Now, in my mind, I have a very specific question. So you were 65 years Holocaust researcher. Did you find an explanation, not a justification, how the Holocaust could have happened in the first place? That's the first half of my question. And the second question is then, is there something that we can learn today when we look at Gaza, Israel, Palestine, from your research about the causes of the Holocaust?
Yeah. Well, greed and jealousy are two very important qualities here. I can tell about sort of like in Hungary, around the turn of the century, not the current turn of the century, but going from the 19th century to the 20th century, Jews were very evident in Hungary. And they
define evident.
Evident. I mean, you couldn't miss them. And I was going to carry on a lot of leading positions, a lot of leading bankers, people in the cultural field. An awful lot of them were Jewish. Now, for instance, already at the end of the 19th century, some right-wing members of parliaments of the Hungarian and right-wing Hungarian MPs in the Hungarian parliament, they complained that the majority of the main singers and conductors, they are Jewish, and they said that the government should stop sponsoring the opera house because there are so many Jews there. So that's envy. Also, as I mentioned to you, that the universities in Budapest in the early 20th century, they were mainly populated by Jewish students. So that is the reason why the numerus clausus law was brought in, that why should our university places taken up by Jews? I mean, there were a lot of very well-educated Jews, a lot of very crafty Jews who made a lot of money, or they were great in science or in music or whatever. So there was there was jealousy, and also greed, because other people who would have liked to do the same and they didn't manage, they were just jealous. I mean, apparently Hitler wanted to be a painter and tried to get into the relevant university in Austria.
Art school, yeah.
Art school, and they didn't accept him. But they accepted a lot of Jews at the same time. So, you know, you could say what would have happened if Hitler was accepted at art school. Perhaps he wouldn't have turned in for politics, and perhaps the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. So this is one thing. It's the jealousy and greed of those who didn't do so well as great many eminent Jews.
But there must be a deeper reason, because I almostly would have said the whole German population, although that's not true, but a large part of the German population supported this. So is there not something?
Well, the Holocaust? Okay, well, there's something else, that economically they were badly off. I mean, didn't they have a depression? Didn't they have a depression at the beginning of the 20th?
The war reparations from the First World War, etc., etc.
20th century. Yeah. There was depression. And then Hitler came along with his National Socialism, promising bread and butter to all those who were unemployed and starving. So what can you do when there is poverty? You can find a scapegoat. So the Jews were a convenient scapegoat. Guess what? This week and last week, who are the scapegoats for those people here in England who are poor and they are in poverty? The refugees, the asylum seekers. So it's always the other who's the scapegoat. And then Hitler got hold of this idea of the Jews being the scapegoat, and I think he saw that he can make a lot of money off this. I mean, an awful lot of Jewish properties were taken, and paintings and instruments and houses and so on and so on. So I think this is again jealousy and greed and poverty.
And if you look now onto Israel, you know, versus, I mean, are there any parallels?
Greed, because they want more and more land. They're not satisfied with the land which they were given officially in 1948. They're not satisfied with the land of 1967. They're not satisfied with the land of 1973. I mean, Hitler wanted the whole of Europe, and the Israelis want the whole of Palestine.
There is a very well-known clip that basically went around the world on a micro level. So there was the house of a Palestinian family was taken by an American Jew, and the lady said, "You are stealing our house." And the guy said, "If I don't steal it, someone else will." Right? So this clip virtually went around the world. It's a very well-known one. So it's not only on a state level, it's on a micro level, on an individual level. The Americans went to Israel and basically stole a house from a Palestinian family which still lives there, and said, "If I don't steal it, someone else will."
Well, this is greed. And by the way, interestingly, I think a lot of these very strongly Zionist Jews in America and England, they have second homes in Israel. That's their second house. And they carry on keeping the US and UK base as well. I know certainly several in the UK with their second home in Israel. I'm not sure which one they regard first and second.
It's interesting, if people have a dual nationality and they are fighting in the Israeli army, whilst they're actually also UK or US citizens, who are they really loyal to? Which country's interest? You know, it's a very mixed.
Well, it seems that the brainwashed Jews are loyal to Israel, I'm afraid, which is heartbreaking. But you know, the way Hitler managed to turn the whole population against the Jews is because he kept repeating lies. And I think Goebbels said that if you keep repeating lies,
often enough,
it becomes the truth.
Yeah.
And with Jeremy Corbyn, when he was elected the leader of the Labour Party in 2015, immediately the weaponization of anti-Semitism came up, and they kept saying anti-Semitism. He's not he probably didn't even know what anti-Semitism was.
Sorry, just out of interest. So I have also asked this in a prior interview. I have not followed this whole Jeremy Corbyn saga with great interest from Holland. If you can encapsulate it, I know he got kicked out based on being, so the accusation of being anti-Semitic, yeah. And I also know that there was a large IPAC, whatever, Israeli push behind that, yeah. But what really happened actually?
Okay, well, I think I'm just going to say it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
He was very sympathetic to the Palestinians. He was aware what happened to them, and he was friendly, but he was not a very important politician. He was just on the sideline protesting all the time. I'm sure he went to protest against the South African apartheid. I don't know if he would have been able to protest against the Vietnam War because it was a long way, and he's only 73 or something now. But he certainly did know about the Palestinians, and he kept friendship with them, and he visited them, and he was pro-Palestinian. He wasn't anti-Semitic. He was just pro-Palestinian for the Palestinians who kept losing their land, their homes, their livelihood. So, but nobody took him very seriously because he didn't have any power. He was just a maverick MP and also a socialist. I mean, he also supported everybody who was poor and dispossessed. But he was just not taken seriously. And then, much to the surprise of everybody in the Labour Party and in the whole government and the establishment, by fluke, it was by fluke that he became the leader of the Labour Party, because there were very strong candidates who were fighting against each other. And then it seems that the Labour Party membership decided that they're not going to vote for any of them. And I would imagine that it was just for fun that they voted for Jeremy Corbyn. And I imagine he was more surprised than anybody else that he became the leader of the Labour Party. I think he was totally unprepared for it. He didn't know what hit him. But this is my opinion. This is my view. But what is for sure that immediately he was accused of all sorts of things. He was a Czech spy. He didn't respect the Queen. All sorts of things, and among others, the strongest one, he was an anti-Semite. And that kept being pushed again and again and again. And that there is anti-Semitism in the Labour Party during Jeremy Corbyn. It was the same Labour Party. I mean, it's ridiculous. Admittedly, a lot of people joined when Jeremy became the leader because someone who stands up for the poor. But then this lie was spread again and again and again that there is no anti-Semitism in the Labour Party because of Jeremy Corbyn. So, and Jeremy Corbyn didn't know how to fight it. He wasn't very good at it. First, he allowed some people to be expelled from the Labour Party, mainly Jews. I myself wanted to become a Labour councillor. I went for it twice during that period. I went through all the application and all that, and I was totally rejected because I apparently I didn't accept the definition of anti-Semitism, and I didn't accept that there was anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Anyway, twice I was rejected, twice I appealed, twice there was a big mock trial. I call it a mock trial. With people talking against me, so I wasn't able to stand as a councillor representing the Labour Party. And but then they didn't expel me, but they did expel an awful lot of people who were pro-Palestinian, and to start with, most of them were Jewish. And they still keep saying that there was anti-Semitism in the Labour Party during Jeremy Corbyn, and Starmer says that he got rid of all the anti-Semites and all the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Well, he certainly got rid of me, because a year ago I resigned so that I can go and campaign for other people. When we had the general election, I campaigned in 3 boroughs, always against Labour. I couldn't have done it if I was a member of the Labour Party, because that's a rule. And besides, I wouldn't do it. So I just resigned at that point, and I campaigned very vigorously and for 3 different candidates. And so they got rid of me as well. But about 3 months ago, I had a letter from the Labour Party. Dear Agnes, we wonder if you would like to return to the Labour Party because we're losing numbers. I thought that was the funniest email I ever had. No, I don't want to. That's not a Labour Party. I'm not returning to it. But it's a bit stupid. They probably just looked at the old files and data and lists. And, I mean, they didn't know who left why. I mean, I wasn't a celebrated rejection from the party. I was not. They wanted to expel me once, and I had the notes and whatever. And I had the right to put in a defense and submit it. So I did do a defense, and I submitted it. And I don't think they published that anywhere, and then they said, okay, you're not expelled. But I think this current Labour admin doesn't even know that. I don't know. I had this email that come back. They still know that I was a Labour Party member and they want me to come back. They must be joking.
Before we conclude this interview, Agnes, if you allow me, and you don't have to answer, yeah? But I saw you have some challenges with your apartment, with your flat.
Yeah, it's a permanent challenge. It's a non-stop challenge. The leasehold system which exists in the United Kingdom is an utter nonsense. It existed for centuries and centuries. It does not exist anywhere else in the world, nowhere. And since 2004, it doesn't exist in Scotland either. So I've got this leasehold flat, which is in a block of flats. So it's supposed to be having a freeholder who's supposed to be looking after things, and the leaseholder is supposed to be paying. It's like it's like paying a rent, except it's called service charge, and you're supposed to be having the value of the flat, so you can sell it if you want to, or something like that. Now, in my case, the freeholders are a total mystery. It used to be the British Rail who sold it to someone else, who went to somewhere else. It's dreadful. And nobody can get hold of them because nobody bothers to get hold of them. And then, therefore, it's the managing agents who are supposed to be looking after everything. And when there are repairs or this and that, everybody has to pay for it. Now, I live on the top floor, and the roof has been very bad for a long time. It still is very bad. And I've been flooded so many times you have no idea. So I got a bit fed up, and I said about 8 years ago, or whenever it was, 7, 8 years ago, I'm not paying no service charges until the rain stops coming into my flat. So they took me to court. And I had all the pictures of what it looks like. I had all the evidence, but I didn't have a barrister. Management had a barrister. And this lower court, called First Tribunal, Property Chamber, they didn't allow me to present any evidence. The barrister on the other side said, how do we know that these pictures were taken in her flat? And so they wiped me out. Then I appealed higher, and then appealed higher. I went right to the top of the British court system, and they all referred back to the first one, and that, as that judge said, blah, blah, blah. Nobody cared at all. And what was at stake by then, they wanted to get my flat without any compensation. It's called forfeiture, because if you misbehave, you forfeit your flat. So they went for that. And what would have happened, I would have lost my home, and whatever value it has now, I don't know whether it's £300,000 or £400,000, I wouldn't have got it. And I still would have had to pay all their legal costs, because I didn't have any legal costs, but all the way through they had the most expensive barristers. How these barristers sleep at night, I don't know. Because it was quite clear from my submission, the roof is leaking. I mean, you don't need... But they just managed to totally wipe me out. So then it was this question of forfeiture, and so that I lose my flat, and also I have to pay, like, by that time they demanded something like 50 or 60,000 pounds in the legal costs, and if I don't pay that, I lose my flat, etc., etc. So now it went on for 6.5 years. Towards the end, I was taken on by a law school who takes some people who they think deserve it, and the students, final year students, are given the job, but they are supervised. So now I had two of these youngsters. They took my evidence, etc., 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 and but they put it into legal language, which is not English, in my opinion. So the final result was that my management demanded by then about £60,000, and I started to fundraise, and I was very successful until Google Mail stopped my mail, because you're not allowed to do things like that apparently. I don't know, but by then I collected about £17,000, from which I did pay out some, because whenever I went higher up, I had to pay some application fee and all that. So I think I already paid about 1,000 or something. But I was very, I had a lot of support from some people who knew me and some people who didn't know me. I had to stop because my Gmail was suspended, because I used to send out like about 50 or 100 mail at a time saying, please support my fundraising. So apparently it was against the rules, don't know why, how. Anyway, what happened was that these two youngsters with the supervisor wrote to management's legal team, and then the management's legal team said to the management, we're not sure that you're going to win this when it goes to the final trial. So then management came to me, it was a year and a half ago. Well, how much can you afford? So I offered what was obvious to everybody, because it's there for everybody. If they put into Google Agnes Kory GoFundMe, they can see that I raised £17,000. So I offered that, and he accepted it, and I paid it. So I saved my bacon. There was no forfeiture. But
The roof.
the roof continues.
Yeah.
It goes on and on. Now my flat is in such a terrible state that my local council is now very adamant that I can't live there, and they want to do this and that and whatnot, and because they're trying to help me,
Yeah.
they're harassing me with that, and I keep saying, look, while the roof is still leaking, I don't want any major, because my flat now would need a total rebuild. So where do I live then? That's my home. I live there. That's my one objection. The other objection is they just don't think about it. Well, you can go somewhere. That's one thing. The other thing is that there's no point if the roof is still leaking, and it's still leaking, and management put in some application to the same judgment that they want to do some partial repair. I objected. That's happening now. I objected. Nobody else objected, because nobody else cares among their fellow leaseholders, because it's not their flat which is getting, and because if there is anything like more expensive roofing, then everybody has to pay. So I objected. Now I lost, and this is happening now. So management was given the permission for that partial repair. We had the partial repair in August. 2 weeks ago, the rain came in. So now I appealed against that decision. I did that 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and I had back something. This is a form you have to fill in. So it goes on. But now I don't refuse paying the service charges, because I know if I refuse paying the service charges, then again, but I don't have any service, I only have the rain. And this is now November 28, 2025. And this is a civilized country. And I don't want any upheaval in my flat until the roof is still not fixed. And anyway, that's my home, and it's my business. And now the council people are coming to see me on Monday. They actually wanted to come to see me today. I said, I've already have enough on my plate today. So they're coming to see me on Monday. But I already look, that's fine, but I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. And until the roof is fixed, I don't want any building work. But apparently it's very dangerous, it's health and safety. So that's why I can't teach in my flat. I used to teach in my flat like for about 50 years. So now when it's not too cold, then we outside somewhere nice on the green with my little music groups. And when it's cold, I have rooms around Swiss Cottage, so I'm very well versed in room hire in Swiss Cottage.
Okay.
So that's how it is. I didn't lose my flat to forfeiture, but my flat is collapsing. And that's the UK. And it's not even so much that it's the leasehold law, because according to the leasehold law, management, the freeholders should do it. But the judicial system in the land of Magna Carta is totally useless. Totally useless. I mean, there is, while we're speaking this week, there was a legal action, the Palestine action. They removed the judge who was sympathetic. Well,
So Palestine Action Group has been a designated terrorist group or something like that? Yeah. There are ongoing court cases and they just removed the judge.
Who was sympathetic to them and allowed the judicial, whatever it is, consideration. So, the government now interferes with the
judiciary system.
Yeah.
Agnes, I could go on and on, but you were very generous with your time.
Well,
I really enjoy. I'm not sure if enjoyed the conversation is the right word, but I was intrigued by the things you said. I'm saddened to hear that your home is a very fundamental, entity in someone's life, and given what you already went through all, from a Holocaust child survivor, breast cancer, heart problems, now this ongoing
Cancer,
cancer,
feet, spine.
yeah. So,
But I'm still here.
you're a tough cookie. Yes. It was so nice meeting you.
It was very nice talking to you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you so much.
Okay.